Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Second and Saints. John Hendrix alongside Ross Jackson with you. Ross, it's almost Easter. It's kind of crazy,
Is it?
right?
Is Easter on the way? I had no idea.
In terms of all stuff, it's getting really, 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 really quickly. Like everything's just fasting
Yeah,
and all that. So I don't know, but how you
going
doing, man?
quick. I'm great, man. I'm great. Yeah, no, the calendar is indeed flying by, and I'm equal parts excited about it and terrified by it. And we'll see how it all goes in terms of all the rest of it. But we appreciate everybody tuning in for us, whether you're catching us live or you're catching us later here for this episode. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Yeah, I just got back from Orlando yesterday with the NFL league meetings, and so that's always a fun thing, just to travel. And man, as soon as I got my head on the pillow, I was out. I
Oh,
slept
I
for like
bet.
nine
Yeah.
plus hours last night. So this happens that way. And yes, we do appreciate everybody tuning in. We know it's kind of like early, different, and most people working and stuff. But of course, you can always catch the Second and Saints replay on the
Mhm.
podcast, YouTube, all that fun stuff. But Ross, we don't have any Saints stuff to talk about. Obviously,
Boo! Of course we
everything is
do. No, I'm
just
just kidding.
great. And like I tweeted with that Chappelle show meme and stuff, that's kind of the things that we're experiencing right now. Let's just hop into it.
Yeah.
Ryan Ramczyk, we saw last month that DA at the combine was optimistic and was encouraged by where Ramczyk was at. Way different story, less than a month away. Now we're even to the point where Ramczyk's future might be in question this season. Now, everybody say this. DA said this is still early. We're in way he phrased it, and being at the meeting with him yesterday, we're still months away from them taking an actual snap. But this is
Mhm.
really, really, really big concern. Your thoughts on Ramczyk, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's definitely a big concern. I mean, the idea that Ramczyk was, progressing better, which is what we heard during the combine and everything like that. Obviously, things can change over time, injuries, rehab, all these other things. They're different for everybody and all. But I mean, the fact that, or the idea that Ryan Ramczyk was going to be okay starting at the beginning of the season kind of made you feel a lot better about the offensive line. And you kind of figured out like, okay, well, you got to see what happens with Trevor Penning there, but give him his shot to, stick at left tackle and then figure out who's going to start at left guard for you. And then you're ready to go. But if you needed to, you would have a starting five. Now you're not necessarily sure if you have that. I appreciate Dennis Allen's kind of view of it, of like, look, there's still time. We'll figure it out. No need to jump to conclusions. There's already reports flying about that, apparently there's concern over his, Ryan Ramczyk's ability to even play this season and stuff like that. But Dennis Allen is saying, whoa, pump the brakes, chill out.
Right.
Like, let's give this time to go through. And the good news is that you don't need him in OTAs and mini camp and things like that. Like, you can get him for a little bit of training camp. Great. But I mean, he's a guy that you can go out there and have start week one. It'd be good if he can get a week of practice underneath him, and as long as he's like conditioned up well and everything like that. So that's why I think training camp's important. But the timeline that we're talking about here isn't, can he be ready for rookie minis? Can he be ready for OTAs? We're talking about like, can he be ready to get his conditioning up during training camp to be ready to start the season? I think that kind of loosens a little bit of the concern for the Saints as well, to just kind of let this play out as they need to.
Yeah, look, that's the third player that we know of that's not going to be really ready. I mean, Chase Young
Mm-hmm.
having his procedure, which they feel good about that, but obviously he's going to be out for a few months. But the outlook does look promising there. And then as far as Cam Jordan, not that we're trying to jump around here, but with Cam Jordan, he had surgery recently on his foot, something that he was trying to correct from playing with during the season and such. But he should be ready for the spring. But and then again, they're going to be smart with that. I think yes, when you get into training camp, that's probably when we'll press the panic button a lot more. But I
Mm-hmm.
think with Ramczyk, this is a concern, right? I think that you look at it, they have guys on the roster, tackle depth, guys like Landon Young, who they do believe a lot in. And look, I'm not telling you that Landon Young's going to be a starting right tackle. Please don't
Right.
jump and bring the pitchforks and all that stuff. But they do believe that is a potential option to start there at the moment. Now, with Ramczyk, this is something that, of course, we knew that even if he was going to be quote unquote close to 100%, he was going to be on this pain management, pain tolerance plan. He's
Hmm.
been doing that the past couple of years. So every Wednesday, he's on the injury report. He's a veteran rest guy. And look, it's not like this thing is going to get better, right?
Right.
Like, I guess that's the biggest thing, is it's not like it's going to just magically say Ramczyk's a guy that, you have a surgery and he's going to be good for the next 5 years. I mean, this is going to be eventually a problem the Saints have to address. My big thing to you in question now is, there's still some guys out there, free agent wise, maybe not somebody that sets on the world on fire, but does this now mean at 14 you are looking heavily at an offensive tackle?
I think you should have been even before this news. And I think the reason why is because you're not just drafting for 2024, you're drafting for the future of your organization, you're drafting for the future of your roster. And so for me, the way that I look at it is that, like, you have to draft the next guy that's going to be there behind Ryan Ramczyk, because even if he is good to start the season, you can't really say that he's going to make it 17 games. You can't really say that, okay, based upon what happened this offseason, everything's going to be better next offseason after another upwards of 17 games being played on that knee and everything. And so for me, I'm looking at, the fact that the Saints could go out there and draft somebody at 14, or potentially sign somebody, a guy like Mekhi Becton, for instance, is still out there, somebody that John Benton has worked with in the past, New Orleans Saints offensive line coach. I don't see anything wrong with pursuing those angles so that you're protected and safeguarded in case things don't get better when it comes to Ryan Ramczyk. And in case things do get better this offseason, but worsen in terms of the long term, you have to be ready. I don't think that any organization in the NFL would have Ryan Ramczyk on their roster right now and not think to themselves, we have to be ready to not have Ryan Ramczyk anymore, because I think that's just simply the reality of where he is now.
Yeah, I think that would be mismanagement, right? I think
Yeah.
that you got to look at that, and look, it's not a bad thing to have depth there, and you can't have as too many offensive linemen, you can't have too many defensive linemen. League rules have changed a lot this year. I mean, there's so much that just happened, but with Ramczyk specifically, I mean, at 14, I think you have to. And of course, if you are drafting, there's some amazing tackles. This is a good year to take an offensive tackle for sure, as long as it's the right offensive tackle.
Hmm.
Again, we've said this for shows, we've written about this. This is months. This is the year you got to take somebody who's a solid prospect, not the guy who's been in D2 or the guy who's in playing against lesser competition. And with
Hmm.
this offensive scheme or system that they're installing, you've got to have somebody that can be ready from day one and then learn the ropes. I think one of the things that I was interested in and, kept hearing or have been hearing for months, and guys like Isaiah Foskey, for instance, from DA yesterday, is talking about how he needs to cut it loose and he needs to stop worrying about learning the defense. And I think for these rookies, there is a lot to learn when you come to the NFL, and you're just trying to get so many of the nuances in. And I think a guy like Trevor Penning, look, I think he's a talented guy, but he's got a lot thrown at him that,
Hmm.
let's be real. He wasn't getting thrown at him in college, right? And there is a
Right.
complex offense. I mean, could you think about it if Drew Brees was still running this offense? This offense is complex. And I think it only
Hmm.
gets a little bit harder with Clint Kubiak coming in. You mentioned, potentially Becton. I think Donovan
Hmm.
Smith. I know he's in that guy that's more on the downward decline of his career, but that's another one to
Probably more
think
cost
about too.
effective, though, Donovan Smith is.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there's ways that you can go about this to maybe make sure that you do it. But at 14, look, there are some amazing tackles. You got what, Fuaga, you got Fashanu, and you got oh gosh, the other one. It's like the triple F type thing, but
Oh,
uh,
Fatano. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Out of
Fatano,
Washington.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Golly,
Troy
I mean,
Fatano. He's the one out of Washington who
yeah,
can play like anywhere on the offensive line outside of center, basically. You can put him anywhere you wanted to.
you you literally have your pick. And so I think that we say all that to say that I think that 14 now you got to look at offensive tackle. I think that's super important because you still just have question marks there. I mean, the team hasn't ruled out bringing Andrus Peat back. He had a visit with the Titans, but that's
Hmm.
still very much on the table. And I think Pete has the leverage up too, if that's even a potential. They said Trevor's not moving positions. Now this begs the question: do you look at him at right tackle? I mean, this is just another, I don't want to say problem, but this is a big thing the Saints have to deal with. And then keep in mind something Mickey has said for months now is they are trying to manage their way back to the cap, not
Hmm.
in the sense of where they're having to play catch up and all this other stuff. They're trying to be a lot more fiscally responsible, if that makes sense. Obviously,
Yeah.
it does, but I don't see them going out and making the big, gigantic blockbuster pay. And then that Chase Young deal was really, really good
Oh,
financially for him.
masterpiece.
But still, this offensive line now, we said it before that they felt better, but now I think you got to take a step back and say, okay, let's pump the brakes. You got to address this. This is something you just can't sit in for the
Yeah.
next couple of months and hope that this is going to work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll push on the idea of the Andrus Peat thing because I see that a lot, but I don't know how signing Andrus Peat helps you. I don't know how that helps to absorb all of that dead cap by letting him walk away and then spending money to bring him back to help you with the Ryan Ramczyk situation. I don't know how that happens because no matter what, you're putting somebody at right tackle that's never played right tackle before. Like Andrus Peat hasn't played right tackle in the NFL,
Yep.
not at least not extensively enough that you could feel comfortable about it. Trevor Penning played entirety of 10 snaps at right tackle during his collegiate year. That was back in 2019. Max was 4 in one game. So I think that like if you still have the right tackle question mark, you've got to bring somebody in specifically to help you with that, in addition to having the depth of a guy like Landon Young, who you do like. So that's why I like the idea of maybe going to free agency, going the veteran route, bringing somebody in, and then drafting somebody that you can then move around, right? That's the time to make that type of decision, not 10 years into somebody's career and say, all right, here you go. Now you're going to do everything you've been doing for 10 years, but do it facing the other way and everything and hope that it all works out. And so I struggle a little bit with the idea of like, oh, we'll just bring Andrus Peat back and everything's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think that's truly the case. So I think you got to use the draft here. And honestly, I think multiple selections in the draft going to the offensive line makes perfect sense to me. Like invest in some depth or potential starter at tackle right off the bat, and then look for depth on the interior as well. There's a lot of these guys that can move around on the interior and be on the outside if you need them to, or just guys that focus on the interior. Javion Cohen out of Miami, Hunter Norzad, the offensive lineman out of Penn State, who's like mad athletic and everything in terms of the different ways that you can utilize him. Kingsley Suamataia can play inside and outside. Kieran Amageji can play inside and outside from Yale. Like they just have a lot of those players. It's a really good offensive line draft. I think you have to load up on it. Now, I don't think you got to spend all 9 picks on it like that joke mock draft that I put out there. But, I do think that 2 selections, double dipping at offensive line, certainly makes sense for the Saints this offseason.
Yeah, and you go back to last year. I think the other parts of it too is they're it's more of a like with Nick Saldiveri. We'll see. They think that he can compete for a starting role, but they're not obviously saying that he is going to be a starter. And we're talking about a guy that was in the 4th round too. So it's not
Right.
like you're putting your hopes and faith and trust in it. But again, if you're going to spend offensive line, especially in 14, they got to be ready to go. Day one, and of course they got to earn the role and all this other stuff. And of course, free agency never stops. The Saints are still shopping. The Saints are still looking at free agents. They still want to add things like a pass catcher to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
But, they didn't add Foster Moreau last year until May. They didn't add Jimmy Graham, until before training camp. Lynn Bowden was another one. I mean, there
Tyrann Mathieu
are
the year
other
before
ones.
that.
Yeah. So it's not like you're in a hurry and say, oh, there's nobody that can be signed or anything like that. I think that's probably the thing that you got to look at is there may be some players out there, you mentioned Becton, we'll see how their markets go because as time goes along, people aren't going to get as big of a deals because there are some people that will play the market and say, okay, well, I was really hoping out for like a 2 or 3 year deal, but they may have to take the 1 year deal that doesn't have a lot of money with it, and it's just a waiting game. And I get it's annoying, but it is almost April, but at the same time, in about less than 2 or 3 weeks, or less than 3 weeks, more or less, the Saints are back at the facility, phase 1 where OTAs and such. So that'll be a really interesting thing. Yeah. A crazy concept, right? To think about. And so they got to figure it out. They got to address it. But I think with Ramczyk, that's a very, very strong possibility that, he may not be in the mix, but of course we've got some time to look at. I'm of the impression that if he's not there for training camp, we don't have any updates training camp, and we don't see him at training camp, that's when I'll be a lot more concerned. But if I'm the Saints, I'm looking at the draft and I'm looking at free agency. I'm saying, okay, we got to get some of these offensive lines scouted yesterday and really try to figure out. And even guys like Cam Irving, I mean, like he was a guy that they brought up late. in the practice squad. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
showed he can still play in this league and start and do things. And so I don't know if that's the mold or prototype they're looking for this Clint Kubiak offense, but I know he's willing to learn. He's a veteran. He's a guy to look at. And again, I'm not saying this is the route that the Saints should go, or they put all their confidence and hope in Cam Irving. But I'm just telling you that as they are looking at guys to fill out this roster and to look at how they build this thing, the answers may present themselves. We got the UFL that's about to kick off on the 31st, right? They're going to find some players from the UFL. You're going to find low-hanging fruit from maybe HBCU or the undrafted pool. I mean, there's just going to be areas that you see guys that we don't talk about. Mark Evans, maybe they can make something of themselves on this offensive line. You just don't know, but it's a very big concern for the Saints. They've got to look at it. We'll see how they address it, but maybe transitioning, because we've talked about offensive line a lot. DA talked to us, Mickey talked to us. There's a lot said. I guess the biggest thing that I segue to, let's talk about Marshon Lattimore again.
Oh yeah.
I think that's pretty big because, Mickey had his comments on Marshon and Dennis had his comments on Marshon. And it's really we've talked about this a lot, is that Marshon is on this team. He's on this roster. He's obviously under contract. This isn't a situation where they have to trade Marshon Lattimore. And you look at the market on the trading, of what the compensation is. I don't think they're in a rush. Nobody's really made an offer that they can't refuse, but also they would prefer to keep Marshon Lattimore on this defense. I think it's even important because they lost Isaac Yiadom and such, and pairing him with Debo. We've been telling you it's just a matter of making sure that Marshon's committed, he's on board, and that men's fences. But more context, more conversation about Marshon Lattimore. But as we've been kind of saying, it sounds like Marshon Lattimore should be playing for the Saints in 2024.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it's leaning more that way. I think that like when we saw the contract restructure and then the option bonus get kicked all the way back to a week before the season, we were like, all right, well, 70-30, there's a possibility here that something happens. Then by the time that we got to the combine, I think it's fair to say that we probably shifted to more like, it's 50-50, but but the momentum is towards Marshon staying. And now I think I'd go 7-30 in the opposite direction, that it feels like Marshon's going to be here in 2024. Now, things can change, right? There could be an injury in training camp that makes a team really desperate, and all of a sudden Mickey's phone rings and there is an offer that they can't refuse. There's a lot of things like that that can happen. But as of right now, it just doesn't feel like that's necessarily the route that they have to go. And like you said, and like we've been saying, they're not in a situation where they're that they're in a situation where they have to trade Marshon Lattimore away, because once that option bonus does kick in, it's automatically prorated the moment that it kicks in. Yeah. So it's not like you're going to take on a full-fledged amount of dead cap based on that. It's going to restructure. It's going to prorate and then kick into future years and all these other things. And so I think that that's the type of thing that makes you go, okay, well, that probably means that he's good for 2025 too, if that ends up happening, or at least like it would be leaning that way. But yeah, no, I think that it's a good thing that like the Saints have. I think it's a good thing that we're seeing that the Saints have kind of, the tone has changed a little bit, and they're a little bit more kind of clear around like, hey, look, no one's making offers. Like we're not, we never said we were going to make a deal, like that kind of stuff, everything. It's all feeling very much like there's an intent, or at least there's some preparations. There's some groundwork being laid in place to kind of pave the way for Marshon Lattimore to stay here in New Orleans, which I think is the right choice for this team, as long as the commitment goes both ways and as long as the fences are mended. Then I think that they're in a good position here.
Yeah, you mentioned the injury part. I was looking at it as like, they're one injury away from that being really bad. You know what I'm saying? Because, and no disrespect to the guys that are behind Adebo and Marshon, and presumably, like we've said before, Lante could still go outside. That's still an option, and they re-signed Ugo Amadi. So I think that's low key a really smart thing, bringing guys like him and Jonathan Abram back. I mean, it doesn't set the world on fire, but Ugo is a guy that could play in the slot if Lante had to push outside, which. Let's face it, I think that they would love to still see Alante be in the slot, but he could be outside. It just remains to be seen. And so they're going to draft corners. They just are, because again, that's another position. You just can't have enough of them there. And so even if Marshon is the guy and he's staying and Adebo, they're one bad injury away from saying, oh, this is not going to be good. And the Saints can't have their secondary fall off. I mean, that has been a strength of this team. And again, it's the end of March. It's a lot of going on that here, and you've got some things to work with outside of the 14 and 45, but you're going to have to probably dip into next year's cookie jar to get into the third, maybe the fourth next year. I don't think the ammunition is enough what you got, although, you never know. Some team out there might bite, but I just think that as you get closer to the draft, that's why you look at, and this is again why I always say free agency, let's see how it plays out. I think it's going to set the stage. They're still going to add players here in the next couple of weeks. I would anticipate to maybe say, okay, here's where I feel like they'll have a little bit better opportunity to draft this particular player. They have a particular need here, a more pressing need. And so it's going to come. It's one way or another, but that secondary, I feel good about the Willie Gay Jr. signing. I think he's a guy that I know we talk a lot about the slot and everything, but the way they talk about Willie Gay Jr., they might have him, Werner, and Davis on the field a lot more. Maybe not play as much nickel. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe people aren't really talking about that, but Willie Gay Jr. didn't come in here to just play a couple snaps. He's a guy that they see is going to compete and going to have a starting role, and they could see all three of those guys on the field at one time.
Oh, yeah. And especially with the direction that NFL offenses are going, like NFL defense has shifted to a lot of those too high safeties and, nickel packages and things like that to try to take away the deep ball, the Patrick Mahomes effect. And then now, because a bunch of defenses have transitioned to that, offenses are going heavier in their backfields, and they're running with two running backs in the backfield, and they're going heavy with two tight ends on the field as run blockers and things like that. And so you have to have three linebackers again. Like, we're right back to it. It shifted out of that for a little while, and now we're right back to the fact that you got to have three linebackers. And so I think that you will see that. And I know that Willie Gay, with his 4.46 speed, is considered a coverage linebacker, but when he first arrived in Kansas City, they had him as a strong side guy. They had him as somebody that was playing downhill, that was rushing the passer, that was, defending the run, that was climbing the line of scrimmage, all those other things. So he really is an all-around guy that came into the league with coverage ability and then developed the run stopping, developed the pass rushing, developed that portion of his game as a Sam linebacker in that Kansas City defense. And then now he might get the opportunity to fit right back into that role and effectively operate in a way similar to what they started to do with Zach Bond toward the end of the season, lining him up, getting him over on the defensive line, outside of the defensive lineman, so still as a third linebacker, rushing from a stand-up spot, but then also utilizing him as somebody that can defend the run, and then maybe be able to help out with the mobile quarterback issue that the Saints have had over the course of the recent past. Like, I picked up what Mickey was putting down with Mickey Loomis's presser, where he said, like, he's going to get a lot of snaps. Like, he said it straight up, like, he's going to be on the field. And so I think that's an exciting new element for the Saints defense.
Yeah, between the new offensive look, I think Willie Gay Jr. is probably the one I'm really excited to see.
Yeah.
Again, nothing against not seeing Chase Young play and all this other stuff, and there's plenty more that's going to happen, but just the way everybody describes him, just the respect he has from Kansas City, the fan base. I mean, the team tweeted out, thank you. Like, you don't see that from many players. Like,
finish up their rookie contract as a linebacker. Like, come on, man. Like, you rarely see that.
And I mean, this is an energy man, hype man, juice man, whatever you want to call it. And so I think he's just somebody that's going to bring a lot of different elements to this team. And defensively, hopefully it all continues to work and look good. I think as you look across this roster, even glowing marks about Cedric Wilson. One of the things I think that the DA talked about, and we've kind of talked about this too, Keith Williams, I think, is going to be a really, really good addition. And I think what they had, and again, nothing with what Cody Burns did was wrong. They just wanted somebody that had a little bit more experience. Cody Burns did a fantastic job, super smart, super intelligent. They just wanted somebody that had a little bit more NFL experience. But Coach Williams, one of the things that they've missed is the guy like Curtis Johnson, the guy who was accountable. I mean, it didn't matter if you did the rep like 99.9% of the way it's supposed to. Curtis Johnson expected you to do 100% every single time. And he lets you know about it. And so I think that's what Keith Williams, and that's one of the things I asked DA, is just kind of what he expected, and that he's going to be tough on him, tough love. And I think with this young wide receiving core, look, I think you compare what you see with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and A.T. Perry, and now you got Cedric Wilson, obviously, in the mix. Hunter Renfro's still out there. There's going to be other receivers that are going to be out there. Stan Morgan's going to be here. But I'm glad you said Stanley Morgan, because it's somebody we don't talk about. And I don't, not that I want to again jump around, but the new kickoff rules, Darren Rizzi said this, like you have talked about the new kickoff setup, and that obviously is a big deal because now you're going to have 2 returners back there. A guy like Stanley Morgan Jr. could be a second returner.
Yep.
You know, you obviously have Rashid that's going to be one. I mean, special teams is going to look a lot different, and how you shape this roster. One of the things that Mickey kind of was asked is that, you know, could that change the way you look at shaping? Your thoughts on the new special teams kickoff rule, what that could mean? And obviously Saints are going to be ahead of the curve because Darren Rizzi is one of the guys who has piloted this and has helped construct this along with help with Coach Fossil and other ones in the XFL too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is important to mention the XFL in that too. That's a good idea because that's kind of where it started off. I think this is great for the game. I think that this gives you the exact same kick return. It's going to look funky. It's going to look different in terms of where like everybody's lining up. But the logic behind where everyone lines up is that on average, that's where the pursuit team is by the time that the player receives the ball, by the time that the returner catches the ball. So by having them start from a non-running stance to starting once the receiver catches the ball, they're in the exact same position. They just have to be able to pick up speed. So the way that I think that this ends up changing potentially, the way that it ends up changing the kickoff, you know, how you build your kickoff return teams and your kickoff coverage teams is that you have to get guys that are explosive, that can go from a standing still start to, you know, blazing down the field as quickly as they can. And the thing that I don't know that a lot of people know is that the return team matches the personnel of the coverage team, not the other way around. And so your returner is always the same. But if the coverage team or the kickoff team comes out and they have all their speed guys out there, then it's the return team that adjusts to that. So you're going to be adjusting probably to a lot more of these kind of explosive guys. And you're probably going to want more blocking types than speed types now as a return group to see if you can kind of stalemate some of these guys at the worst or win at the meet point, right? As in terms of where the protection team and the coverage team actually clash. So I think you're going to see maybe bigger return teams protecting for the returners, but you're going to see smaller, faster guys, or at least more explosive guys on those coverage teams. And the thing that's really nice for the returner in this is that if you get past that initial line, it's you versus the kicker. And so either you're making a great play or the kicker is making an unprecedented play with a tackle in the open field, which can be a lot of fun too. I know that right now people are going to look at this and say, hey, look, this is different than what I'm used to. And therefore it's not something that I'm a fan of. But I promise you, like, go and watch the XFL. Like, if you didn't watch the XFL kickoffs, go and watch. You can watch a whole rundown of them on YouTube. Like, you can see that this is still an exciting part of the game, but it takes out the head collisions. It takes out the full speed collisions that were causing a lot of those head injuries, and it makes the game safer. So we complain all the time about the NFL saying that they want to protect players and that they're worried about player safety, but then we criticize them when they do something that is actually in the interest of player safety. We can't do that. This is a good rule change for the this is a good rule change for the NFL. And I personally think it's a good rule change for the New Orleans Saints as a whole, because they have the return talent that is, you know, Pro Bowl level when it comes to what they have here in Rashid Shaheed. You could add a guy like Stanley Morgan now into that mix. Having 2 good returners means another roster spot and another way for a player to make the roster spot. You're changing the way that these guys are able to make the roster based upon how they fit in these kickoff coverage and return teams. I can go on and on about this, John. I'm sorry. I know I've been rambling quite a bit here, but like, it does have so many implications. And I think that the Saints are going to be uniquely positioned to be able to take advantage of it earlier than maybe other NFL teams will be.
Come on, Ross. You know you can ramble on. It's
Come
obviously
on now. Special teams, man. This is
it's not like people are trying to find more about the Saints in football when there's nothing going on. You know what I mean? But no, I think for real, you're right. And people got to remember, this is something that is not just like made on a whim. This has been almost like 10 plus years in the making, according to Riz, and just the way they've been looking at it. And I think one of the things that he talked about is obviously, and I'm going to butcher the numbers, but it was like less than 20% of kickoffs were actually brought out. And so, again, most people, he made a comment yesterday when he was talking to JD John DeShazer, but he's like, whereas people now would just go get a something during the kickoff, which I kind of thought, I was like, that's kind of interesting that he would say people were going to go use the bathroom or do things during the kickoff, but it's true. But now, you know, where you had a thing where kickoff was almost 70% brought out. And so it's going to give an option. Now, the thing about the surprise on side kicks, I understand that's probably kind of a bummer that you can't do the element of surprise, and there's certain criteria, but I'm willing to see and give it a chance to see how it does. And you mentioned
Yeah.
different guys and the coverage units. This is where guys like Jonathan Abram, Ugo
Yep.
Amadi, DeMarco Jackson, maybe it's Xander Horvath, maybe it's Adam
Yep.
Prentice again. This is going to be blocking. I mean, these are where these guys from 46 to 53 are going to make their mark. And I get it. It's not exciting. It's special teams do matter. And it's like I always said, it's never a problem until it is bad or it looks bad or it's not good. I mean, I think it's a good change of pace that they're at least trying. And
it's
again,
going to make it
revisit.
exciting again. Is the thing. Like, it's going to make the kickoff exciting again because you're actually going to see returns. And like, we didn't see that last year.
Yeah, Jerry's clearly not a fan. I understand that. The only thing I would tell you that I don't like that I could see with the players and this is the simple one, and just to get off a special team, the hip drop tackle has been banned. Like, if the way they did the math, it's like less than 7% of the plays that are involved resulted in injury. So my concern about the rule, which I understand, Mickey's on board. A lot of players are in like front office and them on board because it takes the injury aspect out of the game, is the fact that officiating is not going to be able to see this like beforehand. It's going to have to be one of those bang, bang. And then I hate that it looks bad. So we got to call the penalty, because if you can't challenge it or if you can't let them review or look at it, then it just it's going to be one of those. It's a nightmare. I feel like personally, because that's how it is with roughing the passer. It looks bad. So we're going to throw the flag and call it. But if you can't really look at it, review it, it's just a judgment call for these officials. And now I understand the player safety. That's what we're talking about. But Cam Jordan's one of those players that hate it. Lonnie Johnson Jr. said he absolutely hated it. Like, there's been so many players that say, I hate this. I just understand it. Can you explain the hip drop tackle, maybe just like why that's such a problem? And first and foremost, and maybe what defenders are going to have to, like, is that a learned behavior, or is that something that, you just say, okay, we know how we got to tackle now?
Yeah, I think it's just about knowing how to tackle now. Like, I'm in the minority. I'm glad that they got rid of this rule, or that they implemented this rule so they can get this play out. And I know a lot of people are going to moan and groan about that. But like, look, they did the same thing with the body weight situation on the Anthony Barr rule or whatever, the Aaron Rodgers rule, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
And even Anthony Barr himself was a guy that said, like, look, okay, sure. We just work on how to tackle differently and everything like that. And so we tackle and we roll and we do these other things and stuff like that. Like, you're always having to relearn a little bit. Like, you're always having to readdress how to tackle anyway. And so what this ends up doing is that when you're in those chase down situations, instead of wrapping up behind somebody, swinging your legs out in front and dropping somebody down, which is what this hip drop tackle is. And it slams heads on, I almost said pavement, but slams heads on, the field and all this other stuff. You just tackle through. You tackle through the body. You know what I mean? You tackle through the body, and that's just the way it's got to work. Yeah, I get it. Like, I understand that people don't want officials to be a part of the game. I would like nothing more than for officials to not be a part of the game. I think officials should be full time. I think that there should be accountability for officials. I hate that they're part-time people. I hate that there's no accountability. Those are the actual issues. These little rule changes are the symptom of the poor officiating of the NFL as a whole. The real issue is fixing officiating, starting with the officials and the way that they're hired at the level. These rule changes are symptomatic of the bad officiating. And so these are the things that you have to do, because the NFL, for whatever reason, refuses to do anything about the other stuff. Probably because they don't want referees unionized. I understand everything's a business. I get it. But when it comes down to it, like, that, if you want better officiating, that's the way to get better officiating. These aren't the things that are going to have the impact of it. So for me, I think that the thing that you're looking at here that can be a little bit of a problem for defenses is that if you're executing a chase down tackle, you're not going to be able to grab and pull back anymore effectively. You're going to have to tackle through the body. So it's an extra 2 or 3 yards. But if you're in a chase down situation and you've already given up 20 yards in the first place, 22, 23, fine. The biggest issue is going to be when you're at the goal line and things like that. That's when you're going to have to make a decision. But at that point, take the half a distance to the goal penalty and do what you got to do to bring them down to the ground. It's not going to impact the game the way that I think that people think it's going to impact the game. I think for the most part, you're going to hear about it for the next 2 years, and then you're never going to talk about it again. In fact, the body weight rule for roughing the passers already kind of entering that category. We heard about it less last year than we have since it was implemented and stuff. And so like we're already kind of on the way there. And this is just the way that these types of things work. The other thing is don't let the guy get past you. Right? Play better defense. Play better defense to begin with, and then you don't have to chase somebody down and slam their head up against the turf. So that's the other way that I look at it.
Yeah, you're right on that. And again, I think you hit on the point of and it was like 215 plays or 215 instances this entire thing actually happened. And you hit on something which is obviously a concern, and there's always been an issue. The officiating with them not being full time. I mean, you got to realize these officials have jobs. This is not just their one thing to do. And the fact that you can't say anything about officiating, you can't criticize, you can't say anything because you're going to get fined. It's a horrible look for the NFL, and they got to fix it. But as long as we talk about this, and as long as it's a controversy, the NFL is going to get their money. Then they really don't care, and they don't have to fix anything, right? And it's just one of those that you have to adapt. And so I get it. And this is a good question by the Saint City and me. Shout out to them for supporting us for sure. Do you feel this change will impact Pete Werner because he saw some clips of tackling and thought immediately of him? I mean, I think the answer is it affects a lot of people, but Werner particularly, defense, obviously you're talking about, let's just say you're going up against the Derrick Henry. That's a hard guy to bring down. I mean, Werner, isn't the strongest. He's not like a DeMario, right? So, I mean, do you think somebody like him, it's going to maybe affect him a little bit more? Or, is it going to affect like cornerback group more? Is it going to affect a certain, position group that more than another?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that anybody's going to be disproportionately affected by it. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I think that the people that get disproportionately affected by this are the players that rack up the most tackles on a season-wide basis, right? It's going to be like, yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be about like DeMario's been 100+ tackle guy. He's probably going to get one of these flags this season, or a couple of these flags this season because of how often he is in on plays. I think that those are the people that are going to be but it's not going to be disproportionate in that case. It's going to be based upon how often you're in those plays and how often you're making those tackles and things like that. And so I think that the guys that tackle the most, so linebackers, safeties, are probably going to be the ones that are going to be most impacted by it. But I think that it's all going to be proportional based upon how often a player is involved in tackling and how often that player is involved in tackling in a chase down situation versus an open field head-to-head type of situation. If you're not in the chase down situation, you don't have to worry about this as much. It's when you get into those situations where you have to make a desperate attempt. And look, if you make that desperate attempt on the 3-yard line and you get called for a penalty and then the ball advances to the 2-yard line, good job. You did the right thing in that case. Like, take the penalty at that point. So I think that becomes the biggest thing. But if you're able to either wrap up, hold, wait for help to get there, right? Which is what you're taught all the time. You're not supposed to be making tackles by yourself anyway, right? In the NFL, like that's what a good defense does, is many hats to the ball. Or if you're tackling through the body, then you should be okay here. And I think you're just going to get to the point where you're going to see a lot more guys tackling through the body, which could mean advancing the ball a couple of yards, but in the right situation, that's the better solution than advancing at 15.
Yeah. I mean, and it's one of those you have to see, and maybe, I don't know at training camp if that's something that we'll have we'll keep an eye on. I don't know if they're going to have joint practices. And of course, it's going to be in California. We know that for sure. But I wonder if it'll be in that aspect, because if I'm, the teams will usually, not every team, but most teams will bring the officials in at a certain point to kind of just experience and look and see. And I think with those rule changes, especially, to behoove them to say, let's do this earlier. Let's try to find out, are we doing something wrong, or if there's something that we need to really look at? Because, I don't like seeing people get injured for something like that. That's why I'm glad, the horse collar tackle, that's such a dangerous tackle. Goodness. And I mean, I just can't like, if I've grown up, obviously I'm pretty seasoned, I'll say that, but watching 30+ years of NFL, like, it is a dangerous tackle, and I hate seeing people get hurt like that. And the hip drop one, it's unfortunate, I just think that over the years, when you see gut reactions to rules in place, it doesn't always produce the fruit that you're expecting it to. Just like the pass interference rule from a certain play that involved the Saints, that was just a cop out. You know what I mean? Like, that was horrible. Let's see. Let me look at this. Refs can't even call pass interference
But so
correctly. You know
but
that.
so this is the thing. This is the thing, right? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't implement more rules in the interest of player safety. It means you need to improve officiating. You need to improve the officials. Like that's not a you don't coalesce that into a situation to where then you turn it into like, oh well, because of that, like they shouldn't be making new rules. It's not about the rules in that case. It's about the refs. Get better referees, make them full time, like just do a better
Hold them
job as
accountable.
the NFL. You know what I mean? Like that's like the real impetus for the issue. Everything else is
Yeah.
just symptomatic of that major issue.
Yeah, and Daniel has a good question. How do you determine what technique was applied? There's I don't remember the specifics, but there's like 2 or 3 elements that the
Mhm.
officials are supposed to look for in this tackle. I'd have to find out exactly what those were, but I know one of them is part of how that the in the process of a tackle. But that's what they've been instructed to look for in this. Now, I know it's not going to be perfect. I know the science behind it is going to be crappy. The Saints are going to get screwed by this penalty. So are other NFL teams. Like, this is just what's going to happen. You know, I hate to say it that way, but that's why I said if it looks bad, they're going to call it. That's just how it goes, just like the roughing the passer and such. You know, it's unfortunate, but I think with the league changing so many things, you're just seeing such a mass evolution of the NFL. It's just
Mhm.
some of it's good, some of it's like I'm glad that they're trying, and some of it's like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's always
it used to be that we would see some kind of a rule change like once every 5 or 6 years, 10 years in some cases. Now every year there's like here's 5 rule changes, here's 6 rule changes, here's 4 more rule changes and things like that. Like there's a whole bunch of different things. Like
yeah.
it's wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sticking with more Saints stuff, I mean, we kind of briefly touched on it, but Cam Jordan had off-season surgery. You know,
Mhm.
you can see on his Instagram, it's not like he's shying away from it. Like he was in a
No.
little boot on his
No.
left foot. You know, something that obviously had played with last, you know, during the season, and it affected him a good bit. But he's not expected to miss extensive time. I mean, Dennis Allen said that he should be ready for the spring program, and so that's important. And he's out there, he's doing his rehab, he's progressing. But I think the other part of it is one of the questions I want to ask, and or just kind of just talk about now is you have Chase Young. You obviously know he's not going to be in the mix for a few months. You got Cam, his role might reduce a little bit. Carl Granderson's there. You have Peyton Turner. You have Tano. You have Isaiah Foskey. I think this is a really crowded room, and with Foskey especially, like this is a really important year. And you mentioned special teams earlier. Obviously, he was a guy that played a lot on special teams. Now, I'm not saying your second round pick from last year should be your special teams ace or anything like that, but my question is, do you see anybody moving inside permanently? Because right now you lost Malcolm Roach, you have Brzee, you have Colin and Nathan Shepard and stuff, but this is a crowded room and not everybody's going to make it. And so who's the odd man out? And could you see anybody twisting inside other than maybe sub rush packages?
Yeah, I mean, I could see Tana Passanio maybe moving inside a little bit more. I mean, he's
Mm,
outstanding playing on the
yeah.
inside. He's outstanding. I mean,
Mm,
he was outstanding last year in kind of that rotation with like Carl Granderson and Brian Brzee, and they kind of moved him
mhm,
around a little bit and stuff. And I mean, he seemed to operate really, really comfortably, really, really well next to Brian Brzee. So I could see
mhm.
him being a guy that maybe takes a little bit more of a consistent presence on the inside. The guy that I'm most curious about right now is Peyton Turner because he's the one with the clock ticking more than anybody else, right? Like
Big time.
going into the 4th year
Mm,
of his rookie deal. Saints are going to have to make a decision on his 5th-year option before the season begins. We'll see where all of that is, but um, it's just one of those things to where like it's not really about like him not having the talent because when he's out on the field you can see the talent. I mean, whether it's working on
yeah.
special teams, whether it's as a pass rusher, whatever it might be. I think instead it's just kind of circumstantial, right? He's at the end of his rookie deal. They have to make the 5th-year option decision on him. Now he's got like 3 or 4 guys ahead of him before he even gets to the guys that he's competing with, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that ends up being the kind of the one that I look at that could end up being the odd man out when it comes to it.
Yeah, and I think that I was trying to find it. If I remember correctly, I think it's about 13 mil for
Hmm.
Peyton Turner's 5th-year option, and I just don't see it. I
Yeah.
just don't. And again, you hope he is able to turn it on and do some things. And again, when he's in the lineup, there are benefits. Like I love the sub rush packages that they have where he's twisting inside and Zach Bond's on the outside. Like it's a nightmare to have to defend guys like Tano and Payton Turner. You've touched on it before. There's certain elements of speed and power you're not used to seeing as a guard or center, that when you have a guy that's a quick twitch end or whatever the case, a guy that's kind of a boulder, if you will, it's just you're getting caught off guard a little bit. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously interior could be something that they're obviously going to look at. Tavondre Sweat from Texas, it's a guy that I really, really,
Well,
really, really, really,
listen,
really, really
listen,
like.
listen.
Look,
2024 Norman Hand in the building. Let's go. Like, I'm all about
like,
it.
and so I think that the interior, you got to compensate for losing Malcolm Roach. I think it's a big one, but I think that's another position that you look at some point. They're going to have to look at that interior. I just don't know if you move somebody there. I think it's interesting. Turner, not saying he should go inside, but this versatility is a thing on this defensive line, and so maybe you look at it. Maybe you look at it in camp. Maybe you see it with Tano too, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the answer is. I know Grantham, the defensive line coach, they really are excited about him this year, and especially the fact with Chase Young and such. I think that's another thing that they're, again, the promise is there for this pass rush. They got to have a pass rush. They got to get better at that position too, and be able to get to the quarterback a lot more. And when these one-on-ones is something that Dennis Allen has kind of really stressed. And one of the reasons why they like Chase Young is the fact that he's able to win a lot of these one-on-one reps. But the interior is a question mark. And again, with Foskey, I think him and Payton Turner, you just don't know what you have there, right? And I think that's a question to answer, and hopefully we get the answer to in the next several months. But Cam Jordan, I don't see him playing 60-70% of the snaps a game anymore. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what his role is absolutely going to be, but maybe it's fresh legs Cam, where you bring him in on third downs. I don't know, but I just know that Cam Jordan as a player, as Dennis Allen has talked about, and he said this even at the annual league meeting, that he's a player that's getting older. They want to obviously stick with him, and they're kind of in this 2-year window with him, DeMario, Tyron, some of these guys that are a little bit older. It begs the question, where do you get younger on this roster? Is it totally on defense? Is it on the offensive side? Like, where would you like to see this team get younger at?
I think you want to get younger where you're best. Is usually the like kind of theory behind team building and everything, is that you want to try to find a way to do that. Look, I agree. I think that's kind of the place where you wanna do that. And so I like the idea of New Orleans still having like that very veteran top talent presence in their defense, with guys like Cam Jordan, who we're discussing now, but also DeMario Davis and Tyrann Mathieu, and guys that are also veterans beyond their rookie contracts, like Marshon Lattimore, whoever they end up bringing in potentially at safety, or whether that's Jonathan Abram, right? Like you have sort of that, your top end talent, or who are the people that set the tone for your defense. They are still the veteran players of age with experience. And then you work on getting younger there, so that you have the youth, the speed, the athleticism, everything that you need, and you're kind of raising your next crop. One of the reasons why we've seen the New Orleans Saints be so good defensively over the course of the last, since 2017, is because they've always had a good mix of the old and the new, and being able
Yeah.
to bring people in, cycle people in. They always have the next person ready and everything. And they've been steady at certain spots like linebacker since 2018, and the whole time with Cam on the defensive line. And so but everybody else, they were able to kind of cycle in and cycle through. Once Janoris Jenkins was gone, Paulson Adebo was here, and all those other things, just as an example. And then you see like the safety rollover going from Marcus Williams to Tyrann Mathieu, and some Marcus May here, there, and the other. And then eventually, like when that happened and
Half
that
of
wasn't
Marcus
there
May.
anymore. Yes, exactly. Then you got Jordan Howden in the building and Jonathan Abram in the building, so on and so forth. On the offense, we don't see that very often, right? The team didn't have a succession plan ready post Drew Brees, not a real one,
Yeah.
not one that they had invested in for multiple years before getting to that point and all that. But now they've introduced a little bit of youth. They have the succession plan at wide receiver. They have the succession plan over on the running back side, but they don't necessarily, or they might have the succession plan over on the running back side, but they don't feel like you have any of the succession plans on the offensive side. And so I think you just want to do it where you're best. And right now they're best on the defense. That's what's going to help them win games right now. And I think that that's the place where you want to continue to get younger and continue to introduce, more youth to the team over on that side of the football.
Yeah, I think O-line's probably another one too. Running back is a probably underrated one. No disrespect to it's Jamal and Kamara, but Kendra too. He had injury history last year, and we
Right.
saw what he was capable of. But I think that's an area where you might have to look too. And of course you got to remember, you can't just cut all your veterans loose. The Saints did that, and they failed because of it. Right, when
Right.
letting Malcolm Jenkins go and the Filmas and all the Will Smith, like they just lost so many veterans in leadership that those are some dark years, and they definitely learn from that and don't want to go back to that. So, I mean, I think that's another thing. Not saying that they should just hang on to them just for the sake of it, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, you just can't be like, well, we're just going to cut all these veterans and just hope for the best because these young guys, they need that leadership in the room. They need guys like Demario. They need guys like Tyron, and Tyron was part of the pitch to get Chase Young in the
Get Chase
building,
Young in the
right?
building. Yeah,
Not
for
that they
sure.
had to have Tyron, but the program I feel like has sold itself a good bit and such. So I think that you need some of those guys to help with. And another thing too, that's why they're going through this renovation at the facility too to upgrade things. I mean,
Right.
they want this team to sell itself in a lot of ways, and so I want to get this question too because this is a really good one from MKC Papa. Thank you for the question. What would it
Hey,
take
Mike.
for what would it take for Turner to make sure that that he has success? Is it availability, or does he have to show you something? What do you think?
For me, it's tough because he's got 1 year to do it behind all three. I don't think that you can say that he can completely
Yeah,
show that he is a success. I think he has to be successful in what opportunity he gets. I think that's got to be the thing. I don't think at this point
yeah,
you can turn him into a conversation to where you say, and some of this is about the injury, some of this or injuries, some of this is about opportunity, some of this is about stuff that's outside of Payton Turner's control as well. This isn't just about Payton Turner himself as a player individually, but I just think that the way that everything, like the cards are just kind of stacked up against them, and the way that the Saints have kind of like continuously reinvested in this position group, they're just in a situation here, or Turner necessarily is in a situation here to where he simply has to be successful in what opportunity he gets. But I
yeah,
don't think at this point, with 1 year left on his rookie deal, that you're in a
yep,
situation to where he can turn a first round selection into, or that he can turn in any type of productivity that harkens back to that first round selection. And that's going to be because of opportunity, role, all these other things. And so it's going to be really challenging. I think the thing that's most important is that whatever role he does have, just be as successful as you can in terms of production and availability and health when it comes to that. If you can be productive, if you can be available, if you can be available, and if you can stay healthy, then I think that at least gives you an opportunity to be able to maybe get another contract, whether it's with the Saints or elsewhere. Remember, even if the Saints don't pick up the 5th-year option, they can still bring him
still,
back if they want to, right? So you find the role and you play that role with the most success that you can. But I don't think that Payton Turner would be in a situation here to where focusing on the idea of proving the first round pick expectation a success would be his best move. I think right now the biggest thing is going to be just like, where are you going to be able to get on the field and go and be the best that you can be doing that?
yeah. And I'll just sum it up for you: 15 games in 3 seasons.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nobody that can come in their final year. I look. I hope he balls out. I hope he
Me
plays
too.
extremely
He's a
well.
good dude and
But
he's like good
also,
when he's on the
yeah,
field.
yeah, and I also say this too, like when Cam, like, he's at the facility doing things. I don't know if it's injury related, but I know he's at the facility doing stuff right now. So, I mean, hopefully that's a good sign. And again, they need a Peyton Turner, but I think when you look at this, kind of goes back to why they should draft somebody, a tackle from a name brand school. Like, no offense to it, but
Yeah.
Marcus Davenport never worked out. Peyton Turner hasn't worked out, and Trevor Penning, that one looks like it's not working out. You know what I mean? And so this is why we say can't be the draft where if you're going to go offensive tackle, you're going to go that. You can't go with the player who just doesn't have the experience and the
Mm-hmm.
stuff, even though they have the measurables and the RAS score you like. I just don't. I'm just not in favor of that. I really don't like that. Calvin, giving some love to your boy too. Just switching gears. Peyton Wilson,
Hey, Peyton Wilson, let's go.
45. Peyton
Let's
Wilson.
go.
Yes, no,
Let's
we would love
go.
that for sure. We're gonna answer some questions. We've got so much that we could talk about, and I know time's almost like we're at almost an hour, which we'll keep going. So we'll answer some questions.
Yeah.
Any chance that they sign a guard like Connor Williams or safety like Julian Blackman after the draft? Connor Williams is an interesting one. just my thoughts first is that, guy coming off an injury, very, very highly sought out, player. I feel like that's really what's going to determine him. Ross, there's other guys in the interior, if you're looking that way, that are still available. Guys on the tackle spot. I think the question is, though, when do we start seeing them? And he said Julian Blackman. We talked about Justin Simmons some too, but other things like that. Any chance that they look at any more on the interior, or is it strictly tackle need right now, or what?
No, I highly doubt that they're not looking at every position. You know what I mean? Like they're still in that thing. Like they probably still have a kicker and a punter to bring in for kicker punter competitions during training camp, which
they got that kicker
and all of this stuff.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's right. They do have the kicker.
The Ireland guy from Ireland.
That's right.
Can't remember his name, but
yeah, but and he drilled that kick too. He had the English on it and everything too. He looked like he was rolling a bowling ball down the pin. But look, I mean, that's what they do, right? Like they generate competition. That's what they want to go about it. My favorite name when it comes to interior offensive linemen in terms of like who's available right now is Dalton Reisner. He's somebody that has experience with Kubiak. He's got experience with Dennison as well. Rick Dennison, who is their senior offensive assistant, excuse me. And everything, like he's got experience with all these guys. And so that's one that makes a lot of sense to me. And that's a guy that's won a starting role with 3 different coaching staffs. Like that's a good track record to have and everything. And so I would think so. And I think waiting until after the draft makes sense, protect some of those compensatory picks if you end up getting any. I don't know if they're in line for any just yet, but we'll have to see how some of those other free agency signings end up kind of like stacking up and all. But yeah, I mean, I think after the draft is a good time to do it. And a lot of veterans don't even want to sign the teams until after the draft anyway, because they want to know that they have an opportunity to play for, as opposed to signing first and then having, if they're not going to be a bona fide starter, like you see in the first wave of free agency, they usually want to wait and see how the draft goes and then go to a team that still has the hole open where they could potentially come in, step in and be, that player for them and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's possible for sure.
Do you think, and we didn't mention him, Oli Udoh, what's your thoughts on him? Do you think he has a chance? And where do you see him kind of, because he has the obviously ties to Janako, he ties to Kubiak. I mean, this is a guy that spent with the Vikings, so that's, you can kind of do the math there, but what do you make of him and, potentially where he fits in here?
Yeah, I like him. He's a really athletic player. He was somebody that back in, what was it? The 2019 draft, like made sense for New Orleans. 2020, right. 2019, 2020, one of those two draft, like was just one of those dudes that was like, oh yeah, that's one of those RAS guys that's super athletic. And look, if you want to build a talented offensive line, you build it by bringing in some of the better athletes at those positions and at that unit. Like you want athletic players, especially with the way that the Saints are wanting to operate their offense this year and stuff. So I would expect him to be a guy he's got tackle guard versatility. He can play left and right. He could be a guy that comes in and is kind of like your younger version of James Hurst, potentially. They brought in Max Garcia, who played, all over the place last year for them. Oli Udoh could be another one of those guys that has the opportunity to be able to do that. So I like him. We'll see how things go in terms of him getting back on the field after the quad injury and stuff like that. But he told us that he was ahead of schedule with all that. But, he's a guy that can play on either side. And so maybe he's one of the guys that helps you feel a little bit more comfortable if you're in New Orleans because you made that move. But again, I don't think that he makes it so that you go, okay, done investing on the offensive line. I think obviously you still want to do some work there, but he makes you feel a little bit better than what you had before, for sure.
Yeah, and we've talked about interior guys. You said Reisner. I mean, Trey Turner would be another one that you can look at.
Turner coming back,
where he's at. I mean, there are players I think that they're going to look at in that aspect just to kind of do it. And again, I'm not saying that they should get older or anything like that, but veterans who may have the wherewithal and the talent and can learn. I mean, a lot of these players are diving in the playbook now. I mean, it's not like they're doing as much as they could. Guys like Shaheed have talked about it, McCoy have talked about it. Just anybody that's trying to familiar. But I mean, the excitement is there. But again, we've said it. This doesn't work unless you have the offensive line, and I just feel like you got to find out. And I think what's going to be interesting because you have LSU Pro Day today, and it's obviously going to bring everybody and such, and rightfully so. I mean, there's more than just Dayton Daniels there, obviously, that it warrants consideration. But, anybody that has some type of system experience like this Kubiak offense, I think those got to be some targets you look at, whether it's on the offensive line, whether it's a pass catcher. I mean, there's just so many different spots that you can look at. And so that's a part of things that I would look at and pay attention to is where's Clint Kubiak going? Where's Janako going? Where's some of these guys going? Where's John Benton going to end up, as far as where they're at in pro days and Saints are going to have their own like pro day type thing at the facility too. And so, and they got the top 30 visits coming. So it's going to pick up really quickly, really intense. And then once we get to the draft, it's we're a month away, less than a month away now for the draft, Ross. I mean, we'll have to do a mock draft on here too. And I think we're going to have some guests coming up too. We're going to talk a little bit. So yeah, that's one thing that nobody asked for, but I think feel compelled to do. But if you guys have any comments or questions or anything, y'all have had plenty of comments and I appreciate that. But any questions before we get out of here, we'll answer them. But I think we talked about Mickey, talked about, a little bit about Dennis. And again, if you haven't seen the interviews of those, go on to Second and Saints. All the videos are up there. And then as far as writing goes, without getting too much into weeds, some stuff has been going down and Saints News Network should be back up and running. No problem here very shortly, but appreciate your patience. Those who support us there. But yeah, that's been a pretty big mess that we won't really expound on too much. Here's a question again. Anyone at LSU, Jordan Jefferson as a potential late round DT.
Could be.
Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, he had a nice showing at the Senior Bowl too. And so I know, obviously that's a place where the Saints really like to scout some of their talent and all that. Just, it's a good defensive tackle group. I think that he lacks a little bit of the explosion that you would like at the position and that the Saints really like at the position when it comes to sort of the athleticism there and everything, but not necessarily just the athleticism, but like the get off from the line of scrimmage. But that's something that you can teach and bolster and everything like that too. So if he ends up bringing a little bit more to the table, then maybe that's something they can invest in and then, help him kind of build that sort of explosiveness off the defensive line.
Yeah, I had bad flashbacks when I saw Jordan Jefferson. I had to remember it was the defensive tackle.
Yes, I remember it's a DT. Yeah, not the.
Yeah, so that one was like, wait a second here. Another one, and he brought this up and we didn't get to it yet, but the possibility of Peat getting re-signed. Nothing is off the table was the official answer that was given. You know what I mean? And so I'm not saying because then you'll be like, oh, well, Michael Thomas will come back. And I'm not trying to open up that can of worms. That's not going to happen. You know what I'm saying? But Peat is a guy that maybe you look at and see what happens with the market. Maybe he doesn't get what he's looking at in Tennessee. That's the only reported visit I think I've had from him. But he's another player that when it comes down to it, do they feel like he can play in this Kubiak scheme? That's I think the bigger question to answer. And for sure, if you're going to bring back him, not just because it's Andrus Peat. I mean, he played exceptional left tackle when he wasn't even supposed to play left tackle. So I like that aspect. But do you think that that's even a real possibility? I mean, we talked about it, but any more thoughts on Peat?
Yeah, I don't know. That's so tough, man, because I don't know what his market is. I don't know. And what I mean, I don't know what his market is. None of us know what anybody's market is until they sign a contract. But we don't know until we hear about what their asking price is. But we don't know if he's trying to get left tackle money or if he's trying to get interior offensive line money. The interior offensive line market just shot up big time. Like it increased by like $6 million at the top this offseason and everything. And so it's so tough to kind of try to pinpoint exactly where he is. I would say that if you can get him on a manageable enough contract that makes sense when you've already sunken that dead money that you already invested when he went away, I think that's the thing you have to be able to deal with. Typically, and the one exception was this offseason in Mike Evans, to where the Bucs took on $12 million of dead cap and then brought him back on a new contract and everything. Are you going to do that same thing for Andrus Peat? What was it? 13 in dead?
Yeah, 13, 12.98. So 13. Let's call it 13 million.
Yeah. And so
I mean he's 30.
You could have saved $3 million. You could have saved $3 million by extending him. You know what I mean? And everything like that. But I'm sure he wanted to test the market and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one to reconcile with. But it doesn't mean that the Saints can't do it. And look, he also hasn't signed anywhere yet, too. So if the price tag is acceptable, then sure, I think you can bring him back. But again, I don't know how that really fixes your offensive line problems, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I mean, and there's tons of free agents right now the Saints have that haven't signed anywhere. You know what I mean? That could return to the team. It just might take some time. Some of these guys, like Malcolm Roach is a prime example. He wanted to test the market. The Saints made an offer to him, but he wanted to test, and he got more money than he was going to get in New Orleans. And
Easily.
same thing with Lonnie Johnson Jr.
And a starting role.
Zach Bond, like these guys are getting more money than what they were probably going to get in New Orleans. And it's not that New Orleans didn't want to keep them, but when you look at their cap situation, this is the part that kind of hurts them a little bit, is that they can't just make everything, of what you want as far as a checkbook goes. They can't just make it all work and appear. Right. So it happens. Well, Ross, I guess before we get out of here, look, am I forgetting something? I feel like, talking about DA, I didn't really touch too much on Dennis Lauscha, but just, the Saints, or not Saints, but the city of New Orleans is making really good on their Super Bowl prep for this year and such. And Dennis Lauscha is team president of the Saints and the Pelicans, if you didn't know. And so, he had some cool things to say about the Pelicans. So check that out for sure. But just to reiterate too, one thing I do want to touch on, because he mentioned, because I know fans at home are really upset about training camp moving, and just to give you some perspective, like, it's not safe to hold training camp there. Like, it is a mess and a half, and it has been for months. And I get it. It's like, well, can't you just pay somebody to go finish? Like, they're changing up the egress and they're changing up the cafeteria, like stuff that hasn't been done in like 20 years. And like their weight room is getting changed up. But like right now, the weight room equipment is on the inside facility, and it's on the sidelines where most of the players practice when they have to play inside. It's just not safe. And I don't want to say it sitting here and think like I'm defending the team or anything like that, but just the reality of it is there's just no room for them to do what they need to do.
No shot.
Like, if it rains, you have to call off practice right now because you can't fit it all inside. You just can't. It just happens. So
so it'll be a 1-year situation, and then hopefully because of that, they won't have to move training camp anymore because of what they'll do to improve everything.
Yeah, that's the other part of it, is that it is a 1-year thing. Is they should be back in camp, in Metairie, and we can all sweat ourselves out next time. Lose some weight too. You know what I mean? That's always good. But at any rate, that's something from the owner league meeting. I mean, we touched on Cam, we touched on, anything I think I'm missing, Ross.
Marshon, they're wanting to get compliant, like be their version of compliant.
Touched on the kickoff rule.
I do think the salary cap thing is an interesting thing. Just to add one little note to it, though, is like, this isn't a team that all of a sudden wants to get to the point where they're operating just like everybody else when it comes to the salary cap. They just want to be in their ideal range and everything like that. So like right now they're already $60 million over the salary cap, which is hilarious because we don't actually know what the salary cap is going to be for next year anyway at the moment. But that's that's the estimation, is that they're currently $60 million over the salary cap. And I don't think that when Mickey Loomis talks about like getting closer to being where they want to be means that they're ever going to be in the black in the next year. They're still going to be in the red next year. It's just, it's just that they're going to be operating like $20 to $40 million over the salary cap more comfortably than the $60 million over the salary cap that they're at right now. And so I think that one of the things that kind of clues you in on that is that they didn't restructure Alvin Kamara's contract. They didn't restructure, or at least haven't yet. They didn't or haven't restructured Taysom's contract, right? They didn't touch Juwan Johnson's contract, which they could have as well, at least up until this point. They haven't touched those 3 contracts. We'll see if that changes with sort of the next wave of free agency and all that. But typically, you don't have to do that. You might make a move to like free up the sort of organizational costs that you need for your UDFAs and your, or not your UDFAs, your practice squad and your draft class and like all those other things. So you might need a little bit of that. So maybe that's the place where one of those moves comes in. But otherwise, like, it's pretty indicative that the Saints are trying to just kind of get to their version of salary cap compliance, very heavy quotation marks there, which is still very much going to be them doing what they've always done, which is not treating the salary cap like a 1-year thing and borrowing against next year's salary in the process.
Yeah, and look, the deals with the companies are only getting bigger. Like Peacock buying all these games, international.
Amazon's got an exclusive now, exclusive playoff game. I mean,
like, they are racking in money, and that's the thing that's what hurt them. Is when COVID hit, it wasn't because of their practice, but the salary cap has risen historically every single year, for a long time. And it just, COVID messed everything up. And so now they're trying to get back more in line to that. And so I don't think it'll be 60 million, but if they keep changing deals or tinkering deals, maybe not. But I think there's going to be some fallout. There's going to be things that they'll just have to look at and they're going to be on the table. But of course, we're a long ways away from that. We just want to see win. And you don't need a ton of money to sign your draft class. I mean, you just don't. But
yeah, like $5 million.
Rookies, I mean, if an undrafted
just
rookie
$5
gets
million.
yeah, if you're a UDFA and you get like 125, 150 in guarantees for a UDFA, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah,
like, I mean,
and a lot of those guys fall under the 51 cutoff anyway, so it doesn't even impact your salary cap until you have to pay for a practice squad and everything. And the thing that I liked that Mickey said too about the salary cap thing is that like they got to win games. They got to win games. Like that's going to be the big thing. It's like you can be wherever you want to be salary cap wise, but it doesn't matter if you're not winning. So.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing to talk. Dennis Lauscha. I mean, like they get it, they understand. They said that's the biggest change is you got to win football games to where you don't have the things like what happened with Detroit. But New Orleans is also a city where fans are going to travel to New Orleans to watch the game. It just is. Like I've seen it years over years where like San Francisco had a good presence in the dome. Pittsburgh had a good presence. Chicago, people make the trip to New Orleans. And so, I mean, some people are making a quick buck, and I understand that's your right, and you can do that, but it's not always as simple as
that. Detroit was pretty egregious, though, yo. Like fans did not want to be at that game. Let's just be real.
I have never seen it taken over that much. Like even that's what I'm saying. Even mentioning some of those fan bases to San Francisco, I'd say it was close to half. Pittsburgh probably close to half. Chicago was probably close to half, but Detroit was like 60 to 70, maybe a little bit more. There's a lot of silver and blue in that stands for sure. All right, one more before we go. It says, do you think the new offensive system going away? He's talking about training camp helps them focus more on them being in New Orleans. We've talked about the benefits of moving training camp. So short answer, I think is yes, but maybe expound on a little bit why that is a good thing.
Yeah. I'll try to keep it concise. But the basic idea is that like when you travel away for training camp like this, and you can think back to like Hurricane Ida when they were in Fort Worth and all that at TCU and the other places where they're practicing and stuff. It's you and your teammates. You eat together, you practice together, you go work out together, you hang out together, like you're spending a lot of time together. And so one of the things that Cam Jordan talked about at the end of last season was how everybody sort of in their own silo goes over film study. Whereas back in the day, you used to have to go to the facility to work on film study, and the veterans would be there to teach the younger guys how they do it, how to watch, all this other stuff and everything. And then that kind of went away when everybody just got their Surface tablets and they could walk away with it. This now gives you the opportunity to where like, you're just going to buy out a hotel, I imagine, right? Like they'll be the only ones at the hotel or whatever. And then they end up being together all the time and for that entire time. And so I do think that gives them a little bit of a better opportunity to get, so that it won't take them 12 games to understand the offensive system or to get rolling with the offensive system like it did last year. This gives you an opportunity to really kind of fortify and get a head start on your ability to understand the system amongst one another, share ideas, all that kind of stuff, as opposed to it happening kind of in a siloed situation and then coming back together only for practice.
Yeah, and look, walking around the locker room last year, tablet, how much time have you put on the tablet? That's one of the things that we heard a lot in the locker room. Like, I mean, especially defensively, I mean, that was a big thing for rookies and stuff. And I was laughing in the middle because you talk about training camp and in a hotel together. We'll have to share your Colin Saunders story.
Oh my goodness.
Not right now, but we'll leave the fans as we get closer to training camp. But that was one of the most hilarious things I think I've ever seen in my life.
I might ask Colin to recount that with me at training camp. And then we'll put it here, and then we'll put it here on the show.
Colin, come jump on the show with us. Come hang on. Yeah, we're definitely fine with having plenty of guys come on. So but I thought that was hilarious. But I don't want to steal that thunder. He probably, I know he remembers, but just crazy how it all unfolds, and crazy how the time flies here, man. It's almost an hour and 15 minutes, and we've talked about plenty. And next week you get in April. God,
oh my goodness.
Football is getting closer to coming back. And then, we'll be talking heavy draft next several weeks. So, get your hats on. Ross is going to come with his I don't know. What are you
Mock
going to
draft?
use? I say mock draft, your Rolodex, your little guide, Ross's secret stuff, something like that. Yeah, it's just going to happen. As Ross, man, he puts in a ton of time in the draft. And look, I watch stuff too and see it, but Ross does an exceptional job in studying the prospects, learning the stuff. So be sure to keep him tuned at Locked On. UFL. He said USFL. It's UFL now.
Yeah,
United Football League with the XFL.
But
starts on the 31st. Some former Saints in there too.
Gosh, it's in a couple of days. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
John Trey Kirkland season.
Yep, and he's one of the many. There's a bunch of them. I wrote one point who all was in there, and it was like 15 to 20 players, I think. But of course, that was a month or two ago, so things might have changed. But hey, you never know. These guys are going to get opportunities. I'll tell you that much. So keep an eye out for it. But that's going to do it for us. Be sure to check out Ross Jackson on Locked On Saints. Follow all of their coverage, especially if you need to know anything about any team. Locked On's got you covered there. And then keep up with all our written work. Again, we told you, Saints News Network, a lot of stuff has been happening with the SI stuff. Check it out. Minute Media, though, we're with them now, and things are on the up and up. We seem hopeful and promising with everything there, so we'll get back on that. And then I'm John Hendrix. Check us out here. Boot Crew, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe. We really appreciate all the support and spending your Wednesday morning with us when we know you didn't have to, especially those guys that are overseas. Appreciate y'all as always, for sure. Thanks, guys. We appreciate you. That is going to do it for us. Y'all have a good one. Thanks. Be good people.